There are things a daughter should never have to hear from her own brother on the day of their father's funeral. But I heard them. And now, at 71 years old, I've finally found the courage to tell you what happened at that funeral that destroyed our family forever. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ophelia Anderson Miller, but everyone calls me Miss Fala. I was born in April 1953 in a small town in rural Kentucky called Triumph, where the heat cracked the ground and everyone knew everyone else's business going back to their great-grandparents. My family was always simple but united. At least that's what I thought until recently. My father, Samuel Anderson, was a hard-working man, one of those who woke up before sunrise to tend to the farm and only returned when the stars were already shining in the sky. He had hands calloused from work, but a heart as soft as melted butter. He never raised his voice to anyone at home, never hit any of his children, always resolved everything through conversation. My mother, Constance, was a strong woman, the kind who carried the world on her shoulders without complaining. She cooked for a family of 7 as if it were the most natural thing in the world, washed clothes every day of the week, sewed until late at night to earn some extra money. But she always found time to sit with us in the late afternoon, tell stories, teach prayers, give the kind of advice that only a mother knows how to give. We were 5 children in total. I was the second, between my older brother Anthony and my 3 younger siblings, Mary, John, and Peter. Anthony was only 2 years older than me, but he always acted as if he owned the truth, as if he knew everything a little better than the rest of the family. When we were children, our house was too small for so many people, but full of love. We shared beds, clothes, toys, dreams. On winter nights, when the wind blew strongly and the house trembled, we would all squeeze into our parents' room, sleeping on the floor just to be close to each other. Anthony was always different from the other siblings. From an early age, there was something in him that I never quite understood. A restlessness, an anger that seemed to have no reason. While my other siblings and I played together and shared everything, he always wanted more, always felt he was being shortchanged somehow. I remember once, I must have been about 8 years old, my mother brought candy from the market to divide among all of us. There were 5 equal pieces, carefully measured. But Anthony started crying, saying his piece was smaller, that my mother always gave me more, that he was the forgotten child. My mother, with that infinite patience, took his candy and mine, cut everything again, and let him choose first. Even so, he stayed grumpy for the rest of the day. This happened all the time. If Dad brought fruit, if Mom gave a hug, if a neighbor gave a compliment, Anthony always found a way to turn it into an injustice against him. And the worst part is that my parents always gave in, always tried to make up for it, always gave him a little more attention, hoping he would feel loved. When he reached adolescence, things got worse. Anthony began to question everything my parents did, always with that harshness, that tone of someone who knows better than others. If Dad bought something for the house, he complained that he could have bought something better. If Mom cooked food, he said it was bland, that his friends' mothers cooked better. I always tried to defend our parents, always tried to explain to Anthony that they were doing the best they could, that it wasn't easy raising 5 children with the little money Dad earned. But he would look at me with those eyes full of contempt and say I was foolish, that I didn't understand anything about life, that one day I would discover who our parents really were. Hey folks, leave in the comments what city you're watching this old lady's stories from. You don't know how it warms my heart to know that my words are reaching so far. And if you can, please like and subscribe to Grandparents' Tales. It gives me strength to continue sharing with you all. When I turned 15, Anthony was already 17 and started working at an auto repair shop in town. He didn't earn much, but it was his own money, and that completely changed the way he behaved at home. He started thinking he was better than us, who still depended on our parents for everything. I remember a terrible argument he had with Dad around that time. Dad had asked him to help fix the fence in the backyard, something we always did together, each doing their part. But Anthony exploded, yelling that he wasn't a child anymore, that he worked outside the home, that he had no obligation to do house chores. "I already earn my own money," he shouted, with that altered voice I had never heard before. "I don't need to stay here doing slave work anymore." Dad stayed quiet, with his way of not liking conflict. But Mom couldn't take it. She got up from the chair where she was sewing and went after Anthony with a fury I had never seen before. Slave work? This house that you call slave work is where you eat, where you sleep, where you were raised with all the love in the world. If you think you're so important, you can pack your things and go live somewhere else. Anthony turned red with anger, but didn't have the courage to answer Mom. He left slamming the door, saying that one day we would miss him, that he would show everyone what he was capable of. He stayed away for 3 days. Dad was worried, wanted to go looking for him, but Mom said he needed to learn, that he couldn't continue disrespecting the family that way. When he returned, he didn't apologize to anyone, just arrived at dinner time and sat at the table as if nothing had happened. But something had definitely changed in him. He began to treat all of us with a coldness that hurt to the soul. He ate silently, left for work without saying goodbye, came home, and went straight to his room. When he did say something, it was always with that tone of superiority, as if he were doing us a favor by still living with us. I tried to talk to him, tried to recover that complicity we had when we were children. But he looked at me as if I were a stranger, as if we hadn't grown up together, slept in the same bed, played the same games. "You don't understand anything about life, Fela," he would always say when I tried to get close. "You're still a child spoiled by your parents. When you grow up, you'll see how cruel the world is." Spoiled by my parents? Me, who had been helping Mom with all the housework since I was 10 years old? Me, who took care of the younger siblings when she needed to go out? Me, who never asked for anything beyond what was necessary? Who always shared everything with everyone? But as much as his words hurt me, I kept trying. Because deep down, I still believed that was my brother. That somewhere inside him, there was still the boy who played with me, who protected me when someone tried to bother me at school. When I turned 18, Anthony was already 20 and had moved out. He got a small room near the auto shop where he worked, said he needed independence, that he couldn't stand living in a house full of people anymore. Dad was sad, but respected his decision. "Every bird has its time to fly," Dad said that day, trying to hide the hurt in his voice. "I just hope he doesn't forget the nest where he was raised." But Anthony not only forgot the nest, he began to badmouth it to everyone. We heard from neighbors that he was telling people our family was backward, that our parents didn't understand anything about modern life, that he had to free himself from that environment to grow. This hurt Mom more than Dad. She stayed quiet, but I saw in her eyes that deep sadness, that disappointment of a mother who can't understand where she went wrong. "Did I do something wrong with that boy?" she would ask Dad on nights when she thought we weren't listening. "Did I spoil him too much? Or was I too harsh?" Dad always answered no, that she had been an exemplary mother, that Anthony was the one who had chosen to be that way. But I knew they both carried a guilt that wasn't theirs, a pain they didn't deserve to feel. Anthony only showed up at home on special dates. Christmas, parents' birthdays, a family wedding. And even then, always with that face of someone doing a favor, always complaining about something, always finding a way to spoil the atmosphere. On Dad's 50th birthday, he arrived late and still had the nerve to complain about the food Mom had prepared. He said it was bland, that his friends' mothers cooked better, that our family didn't know how to entertain guests. Mom didn't say anything at the time, but later, when he left, she cried. Cried like I had never seen her cry, with that pain that comes from deep inside the chest. That pain of a mother who can't understand why her son has turned into a stranger. "I don't know what to do with that boy anymore," she said to Dad, between sobs. "It seems like the more I try to get close, the more he pulls away." It was around this time that I decided I wouldn't silently accept Anthony's rudeness anymore. Every time he showed up at home with that superiority, I pushed back. Every time he disrespected our parents, I defended them. This created a tension between us that only grew over time. "You've always been the favorite," he would say when I confronted him. "Always the perfect daughter, the one who never did anything wrong. But one day Mom and Dad will discover who you really are." These words confused me, left me not knowing what to say. Favorite? Perfect daughter? I was just trying to be a good daughter, just trying to help my parents, just trying to keep the family together. But in his mind, this was some kind of crime. Some kind of manipulation. Years went by, and the distance between Anthony and our family only increased. He got married without inviting anyone from home. We only found out afterward through neighbors' comments. He had children we barely knew, who grew up hearing bad things about their grandparents. I got married at 22 to a good, hard-working man who loved our family as if it were his own. My husband always tried to make peace with Anthony, always invited him to have lunch with us, always treated him with respect. But Anthony maintained that coldness, that distance, as if he were doing us a favor by accepting our approach. When my children were born, he barely showed up to meet them. When he did appear, it was always with that face of someone wasting time, always in a hurry to leave. My children grew up knowing little of their uncle, aware that there was a tension in the family they couldn't understand. Mom and Dad grew older, and I naturally took on the role of caring for them. Not because anyone forced me to, but because that's what I felt in my heart. They had given me so much love, so much care, so much sacrifice throughout their lives, that taking care of them in their old age was the least I could do. Anthony would show up from time to time, always in a hurry, always with that face of someone fulfilling an annoying obligation. He never offered to help, never asked if I needed anything, never showed real concern for our parents' well-being. When Mom started getting sick, I was the one who ran after doctors, I who spent sleepless nights taking care of her, I who held her hand in the most difficult moments. Anthony showed up at the hospital a few times, always with that face of someone wasting time, always complaining about the expenses with medicines. Mom died on a September morning, holding my hand, with Dad on the other side of the bed. Anthony arrived 2 hours later, when she had already passed. He didn't cry, didn't show emotion, just asked about the papers, about what she had left behind. It was at that moment that I began to understand that my brother was no longer the boy I knew. Something inside him had died a long time ago, something I didn't know if I would ever be able to rescue. Mom's funeral was just the beginning of the nightmare our family would become. There, before her coffin, a war began that I never imagined I would experience with my own brother. 3 days after the funeral, Anthony showed up at Dad's house with a folder full of papers and that face of someone coming to resolve business matters. He didn't ask how Dad was dealing with the loss, didn't bother to console him. He got straight to the point. "We need to talk about Mom's inheritance," he said, spreading documents across the kitchen table as if it were an office. Dad looked at those papers with a confusion in his eyes that broke my heart. He had barely recovered from the shock of losing his partner of 45 years of marriage. And Anthony was already there, calculating assets, doing the math. "What inheritance, my son?" asked Dad, his voice still choked with sadness. "Your mother didn't have anything in her name. Everything here was always ours, the couple's." Anthony scoffed, as if Dad were an idiot who didn't understand anything about life. "Dad, you don't know how things work. Mom was entitled to half of everything. And now that she's dead, that half is divided among the children." I stayed quiet, trying to understand where Anthony wanted to go with this. The house where Dad lived was small, simple, bought with much sacrifice over decades of work. It wasn't a palace, it wasn't a mansion. It was just the home where our family had been raised. "This all needs to be appraised," he continued, gesturing around the house as if he were a realtor. "The house, the land, the savings Mom had in the bank, everything needs to be divided properly." Dad looked at me with those lost eyes, asking for help to understand what was happening. "Fela, do you understand what your brother is talking about?" Before I could answer, Anthony exploded. "Of course she understands. She's here every day, controlling everything, influencing you. I bet she already knows exactly how much money Mom had saved." His accusation left me speechless. Controlling? Influencing? Me, who just took care of Dad because that's what my heart told me to do, because that's what any decent daughter would do? "Anthony, what are you talking about?" I managed to whisper. "I just take care of Dad. I never asked for anything in return." "Oh, no?" He laughed. But it was a cold laugh, without joy. "And who do you think is going to get everything when Dad dies? Who do you think he's going to leave the house, the savings to? The daughter who's always here, playing nice, or the son he barely sees?" His words hit me like punches. Was that it? Was that how he saw my care for Dad, as a strategy to inherit more? Dad stood up from the table, trembling with indignation. "Anthony, how dare you speak like that about your sister? How dare you think she takes care of me out of self-interest? Dad, you're very naive. Anthony responded with that coldness I knew well. A woman who spends a lot of time caring for an old man always has ulterior motives. That's how the world works. At that moment, I understood that I had lost my brother forever. It was no longer possible to pretend there was any salvation for our relationship. He had transformed my love for the family into something dirty, into manipulation. "Get out of my house," said Dad, his voice firm, despite his age. "Get out now, before I do something I'll regret." Anthony gathered the papers with calculated calm. "I'll leave, but this isn't over. I'm going to see a lawyer. I have a right to my part of Mom's inheritance, and I'm going after what's mine." After he left, Dad collapsed in the chair, his hands trembling. What kind of son did I raise, my God? What kind of son only sees money where he should see love? In the following days, letters from the lawyer Anthony had hired began to arrive. Complicated papers, full of legal terms that neither Dad nor I fully understood. They talked about inventory, division of assets, judicial appraisal. Dad got so nervous with those papers that he began to feel ill. His blood pressure rose, his heart raced, he couldn't sleep. The doctor said it was stress, that he needed calm, tranquility. But how could he have tranquility with his own son fighting in court? I had to hire a lawyer, too, to defend Dad from all that madness. Mr. Henry, an elderly man who understood these matters, explained the situation to us. "Legally, your brother is partly right," he said, looking through the papers Anthony had presented. "When the mother died, her part of the couple's assets passes to the children. But since your father is still alive, he has the right to continue living in the house, to use the assets for his subsistence." "You mean he can't take the house from Dad?" I asked, relieved. "He can't take it away, but he can demand that an appraisal be made. And when your father dies, the part that was the mother's will have to be divided among all the children." The idea that Anthony was practically waiting for Dad to die to get his share of the inheritance made me sick. How does a son reach that point? How does love turn into greed like that? Months passed with paperwork, meetings with lawyers, constant tension. Dad became increasingly dejected, weaker, sadder. He saw the son he had raised with so much love transformed into a stranger who only showed up to fight over money. Anthony came a few times during this period, always accompanied by the lawyer, always with that face of someone collecting a debt. He didn't ask how Dad was health-wise, didn't show affection, didn't show longing. It was pure financial interest. "You need to understand that I'm defending my rights," he would say to Dad, as if it were some kind of favor. "It's nothing personal." How was it not personal? It was his family being destroyed. It was Dad's heart being shattered. But for him, it was all just numbers, percentages, mathematical divisions. During this horrible period, I discovered things about Anthony that shocked me even more. I heard from neighbors that he was bad-mouthing Dad around town, making up stories, saying that Dad was stingy, that he hid money, that he favored me because I was a woman. "He's been saying that your father has much more money than he shows," Mrs. Carmen, our neighbor of decades, told me. "That you're hiding properties, bank accounts. He's making your father look like a liar in the entire town." This infuriated me more than anything. Dad was an honest, hard-working man who never lied to anyone in his life. And now he had to endure his own son making up lies about him, destroying his reputation in the community where he had lived for 50 years. When I confronted Anthony about these stories, he didn't even deny it. "I'm just investigating the family's assets," he said, with that calculating coldness. "It's my right to know exactly what my parents own." "Dad never hid anything from you," I shouted, losing my patience. "Everything he has is right there on the table in the documents. A simple house, a savings account with $3,000. What fortune do you think exists?" "Ah, Fela, you're very naive," he replied, shaking his head as if I were a foolish child. "A man of Dad's age always has hidden money. He always has something he doesn't tell the children." It was unbelievable. He had created a fantasy in his head, an illusion that Dad was some kind of disguised millionaire. And the more he discovered it wasn't true, the angrier he became, the more convinced he was that we were hiding something. The situation got even worse when Anthony started pressuring our other siblings. Mary, John, and Peter, who had always remained neutral in family conflicts, suddenly found themselves in the middle of a war they didn't understand. Anthony called them constantly, filling their heads with ideas about inheritance, about rights, about how I was manipulating Dad. He said they also had a right to part of Mom's inheritance, that they needed to join him to ensure what was theirs. Mary, poor thing, called me crying one day. "Fela, I don't understand anything that Anthony is talking about. He says you're stealing our inheritance, that Dad is being influenced. Is that true?" It hurt my heart that my own sister could believe such an accusation. "Mary, you've known me since you were born. When have I ever stolen anything from anyone? When have I ever done anything out of self-interest?" I know," she whispered. "But Anthony speaks with such certainty, with so many details. It gets hard not to think about it, you know?" That was his strategy. Repeat the lies so many times, with such conviction, that even the people who knew me began to have doubts. It was psychological torture, not just with me, but with the whole family. John and Peter also began to look at me differently when they came to visit Dad. They didn't say anything directly, but I felt the distrust in the air, the unasked questions, the investigative looks when I handled Dad's papers. The family that Mom had built with so much love was falling apart because of the greed and lies of a son who couldn't accept that there was no fortune to be disputed. At the end of 2009, Mr. Henry managed to close a deal. The house was valued at $120,000, a fair value for a simple house in a small town. Mom's part, $60,000, would be divided among the 5 children when Dad died. Her small savings, $8,000, were divided immediately. Anthony received his $1,600 as if it were a lottery prize. He didn't thank anyone, didn't apologize for the trouble, didn't show any remorse for the suffering he had caused. He took the money and disappeared again. Dad was different after all this. Quieter, more introspective, as if something inside him had broken permanently. Sometimes I would find him staring at nothing, with that deep sadness of someone who lost more than his wife. He lost the illusion about his own son. "I raised a snake," he muttered one day, not looking me in the eyes. "I fed a snake in my own chest, and now it bites me." I tried to console him, to say that Anthony might change with time, that he might regret what he had done. But deep down, I had also lost hope. My brother had transformed into a person I didn't recognize, driven only by greed and resentment. The following years were ones of almost total silence from Anthony. He would appear once a year, on Dad's birthday, always in a hurry, always with that face of someone fulfilling an annoying obligation. He didn't bring presents, didn't show affection, didn't ask about Dad's health. During these rare visits, I noticed that he observed everything with eagle eyes. He looked at the furniture, the appliances, asked subtle questions about expenses, about retirement, about Dad's health status. He was always calculating, always speculating about when his time to inherit would come. It was macabre to see a son look at his father as if he were a walking bank account. It was sad to see that all the love, all the sacrifice, all the dedication that Dad had given him had turned into an Excel spreadsheet in his head. In 2010, our sister Mary died in a car accident. It was a tragedy that shook the entire family. Dad was devastated. Losing a child is a pain that has no name. I spent days consoling him, trying to help him deal with this terrible loss. Anthony showed up at Mary's wake, but even in that moment of pain, he managed to be insensitive. Instead of consoling Dad, instead of crying for his sister, he kept asking about her assets, about what she had left for her children. "Did Mary have anything in her name?" he asked me in the middle of the wake. "Any account? Any investment?" I couldn't answer. I couldn't believe that on the day of our sister's burial, he was thinking about inheritance. It was as if Mary's death were just another item in his accounting. After the burial, Dad became even more dejected. He began to talk about death, about leaving soon to meet Mom and Mary. He said he was tired, that he no longer saw meaning in continuing to live. "I've already lost too many people, Fela," he would say with that tired voice. "Your mother, Mary." And I still have to endure Anthony's coldness. Sometimes I think it would be better to go once and for all. These words scared me. Dad had always been a strong, fighting man who faced difficulties with courage. Seeing him discouraged like that, talking about giving up on life, left me desperate. That's when I decided I wouldn't let Anthony continue poisoning the last years of our father's life. If he wanted to stay away, let him stay. If he only showed up to cause suffering, let him not show up anymore. Dad deserved peace in his last years, deserved to be surrounded only by love and affection. But I didn't know that the worst was yet to come, that Anthony would still be capable of a cruelty I never imagined possible, and that all this would be just the warm-up for the horror he would make me endure on the most painful day of my life. In 2015, Dad began to show the first signs that age was really weighing on him. He had always been a strong man, one of those who never complained about anything, but he began to get slower, more forgetful, more dependent on help for the basic things of day-to-day life. At first, it was small things that I attributed to normal aging. He forgot where he had put his glasses, repeated the same question twice in a row, sometimes got confused about what day of the week it was. Nothing that worried me too much initially. But in March of that year, he had a fall in the bathroom that terrified me. He was taking a shower alone, as he always did, when he slipped and hit his head on the wall. When I arrived, I lived in the house next to his. I found Dad on the floor, with blood dripping from his forehead, trying to get up without success. "Dad! My God, what happened?" I screamed, running to help him. "Oh, Fela, it was nothing," he said, trying to minimize it. "Floor was wet. I slipped. I'm fine already." But he wasn't fine. It took him a while to fully orient himself, and when I took him to the hospital, the doctor said he had suffered a mild concussion. Nothing serious, but enough to alert me that Dad could no longer stay alone at home without supervision. From that day on, I organized my routine to always be nearby. Early in the morning, I would go to his house to prepare breakfast, check if he had taken his blood pressure medication, help with bathing if necessary. During the day, I would stop by several times to see if everything was okay. At night, I only went to sleep after making sure he was safe. It wasn't a burden for me. He was my father, the man who had raised me with so much love, who had worked his entire life to give the best he could to his children. Taking care of him in his last years was the least I could do. It was an honor, actually. But Anthony saw the situation with different eyes. On the rare occasions when he appeared, he made comments that left me furious. "Dad is becoming very dependent," he would say, as if it were Dad's fault that he was aging. "You being here every day might be making him too comfortable." Comfortable? A man of 82 who had worked since he was 7 years old? A man who raised 5 children alone after Mom died? How could he use such a word? "Anthony, Dad needs care," I replied, trying to remain polite. "It's natural with age, and it's the children's obligation to care for parents when they need it." "Obligation?" he repeated, with that cynical smile I knew well. "Funny how only you feel obligated. Don't the other children count?" It was always the same conversation. He turned my care for Dad into a competition, into a question of who did more or less for the family, as if love were a mathematical account that could be divided equally. At the end of 2015, Dad got pneumonia that almost took him. It was 2 weeks in the hospital, on oxygen, with antibiotics in the vein. Sleepless nights praying for him not to leave. I spent all those days in the hospital, sleeping in the chair next to his bed, helping the nurses, talking with the doctors. Anthony showed up 3 times during those 2 weeks, 3 times in 14 days, and always in a hurry, always with that face of someone wasting precious time. He didn't stay even an hour, just long enough to ask the doctor what the prognosis was, if Dad was at risk of death. "Doctor, what's his real situation?" he asked on the second visit, as if he were an investor asking about stocks. "Are the chances of recovery good?" The doctor looked at me, embarrassed, before answering. He must have found the coldness of the question strange. "Your father is a strong man, but pneumonia in the elderly is always concerning. We're doing everything we can." When Dad recovered and was discharged, he was even more fragile. The doctor recommended physical therapy, special care with nutrition, constant monitoring. It was as if the pneumonia had aged him 5 years at once. That's when I made the decision to bring him to live with me. My house was bigger, had a room on the ground floor that would be perfect for him, and I could take care of him 24 hours a day without having to run from one house to another. Dad resisted at first. "Fela, I don't want to be a burden for you. I've done that my whole life, taking care of myself." "Dad, it's not a burden," I said. arranging his things in the room I had prepared for him. It's love. It's taking care of someone who always took care of me. He moved into my house in January 2016, and it was one of the best decisions I made. He became more relaxed, more secure, and I had the peace of mind of knowing that he was well cared for. I adapted the entire house for him. I put support bars in the bathroom, non-slip mats, a bell next to the bed for him to call me if he needed during the night. I hired a physical therapist who came 3 times a week, organized a medication routine, changed my diet to prepare food that was good for him. Anthony didn't like the move at all. He showed up at my house a week after the move, with that investigative face I already knew. "So, now Dad lives here?" he asked, looking around as if he were evaluating a property. "Yes, it's more practical to take care of him, and he's less alone." "I see," he said, but the tone indicated that he didn't understand anything, or rather, that he understood things that didn't exist. "And the house there? Will it stay empty?" "For now it's closed. We're not going to sell it if that's what you're thinking." He gave a little laugh that irritated me deeply. "I'm not thinking anything, Fela. I just find it interesting how you always find a way to stay closer to Dad's things." Closer to his things? As if I were a loan shark collecting a debt. As if taking care of my father were some kind of real estate investment. "Anthony, if you want to help take care of Dad, the doors are open. You can come here every day. You can take him for walks. You can help with medical appointments. Nothing prevents you from being a son too." "I work, Fela. I can't be playing nurse like you." Playing nurse. That's how he saw my dedication. That's how he viewed the sleepless nights when Dad was in pain, the baths I gave him when he was too weak to wash himself, the medical appointments I religiously attended. During 2016 and 2017, we established a good routine. Dad was more stable, responded well to medications, had recovered part of his strength after the pneumonia. He wasn't the vigorous man I knew anymore, but he was dignified, comfortable, surrounded by affection. My daughters loved having their grandfather at home. They would come for lunch on Sundays, bring the grandchildren for him to play with, tell stories from school, from work. Dad smiled like he hadn't smiled in years, participated in conversations, gave advice, felt useful and loved. Anthony continued his sporadic visits, always in a hurry, always asking questions that bothered me. He wanted to know about expenses with doctors, about medications, about who was paying Dad's bills. "These medications are expensive," he would say, looking at the boxes on the kitchen table. "Who's covering all this?" "We're dividing the expenses," I replied. "Dad's retirement covers part, I supplement the rest." "You supplement?" he repeated, with that tone of someone who discovered something suspicious. "And how does that work at the time of division? Are you going to charge these expenses you're having from the inheritance?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He was calculating my expenses with Dad, as if they were investments that I intended to recover later, as if each medication, each consultation, each care were an invoice that I kept to present when Dad died. "Anthony, I'm not charging anything from anyone. I'm taking care of my father because I love him, not because I expect to profit from it." "Everyone says that, Fela. But when the time comes, there's always a bill to be paid." His suspicions made me sick. It was as if he poisoned every gesture of affection, every moment of dedication with his distrust. As if it were impossible for him to believe that someone could love without financial interest. In 2018, Dad began to show signs that he was preparing to leave. They weren't serious medical signs. The tests were stable. His heart was working well for his age. They were signs of the soul, of the mind, of the spirit. He began to talk a lot about Mom and Mary. He said he dreamed of them almost every night, that they appeared to him asking him to come meet them. Sometimes he would wake up calling Mom's name, as if she were in the room. "She was here, Fela," he would say after these episodes. "Your mother was sitting in the chair there, smiling at me. She said she misses me, that she wants me to come soon." These were moments that broke my heart. On one hand, I saw that Dad had a growing peace, an acceptance of death that was almost serene. On the other hand, I knew I was losing the last link to my childhood, to my history, to the family we had once been. In September 2018, Dad had a small stroke during the night. It wasn't serious, he wasn't paralyzed, he didn't lose his speech, but it was enough to leave him even more fragile. The doctor said other episodes could happen, that it was a matter of time. From that moment on, I intensified the care even more. I hired a nurse to stay during the night, adapted the house so that he wouldn't need to climb stairs, organized everything so that his last months would be as comfortable as possible. Anthony showed up at the hospital after the stroke, but his first question wasn't about Dad's condition. It was about the medical prognosis, about how much time he still had. "Doctor, what's his life expectancy now?" he asked the neurologist, as if he were checking the expiration date of a product. The doctor looked at me again with that embarrassed expression. "It's hard to say precisely. Your father is 85 years old, had a mild episode. He could live a few more years with adequate care." I saw in Anthony's eyes an expression that froze my blood. It was disappointment. Disappointment because Dad was still going to live for some time, because it would take longer for him to be able to inherit what he thought he was entitled to. At that moment, I understood that my brother no longer saw Dad as a person, as a father, as a human being. He saw only an obstacle between him and the money he imagined he would receive when Dad died. The last months of 2018 and the first of 2019 were intense. Dad was lucid but fragile. He could talk, feed himself, watch television, but he needed help for almost everything. It was like taking care of a big child, with all the responsibility and all the affection that it demanded. In March 2019, on a Tuesday morning, Dad couldn't get out of bed. He wasn't feeling sick, he wasn't in pain. He simply had no more strength in his legs. I called the doctor, who said it was a natural evolution of the neurological condition. "It's time for palliative care," explained Dr. Monroe. "Keep him comfortable, without pain, surrounded by love. That's what we can do now." Palliative care. The word sounded like a sentence. Dad was entering the final stretch, and I knew that each day from that moment on was a blessing, a gift that needed to be enjoyed to the fullest. I organized everything so that he would have the best quality of life possible in these last times. The hospital bed in the living room so he could see the movement of the house, the television always on with the shows he liked, the granddaughters coming to visit him every day after school. And it was during this period, when Dad was most vulnerable, most dependent, most in need of love and affection, that Anthony decided to cause the greatest suffering of his life, the final blow that almost killed Dad before his time. And that showed me how far a son can be cruel to his own father. It was on a Thursday morning at the end of June 2019 that Anthony arrived at my house with an expression on his face that I had never seen before. It wasn't the usual coldness, nor the calculated indifference. It was something worse, a controlled anger, a fury that he was trying to disguise behind a false smile. Dad was in the hospital bed in the living room, watching the morning news. He had woken up well, had breakfast normally, talked with the nurse about the weather. It was one of the better days he had had in the last few weeks. "Good morning, Dad," said Anthony, kissing his forehead with a show of affection that made me feel nauseous. "How are you feeling today?" "Good, my son, good," replied Dad, with that tired but genuine smile he always had for his children. "I'm glad you came to see me." Anthony pulled up a chair and sat next to the bed, but I noticed that he was tense, restless. His hands trembled slightly, and he avoided looking directly into Dad's eyes. "Dad, I need to talk to you about something serious," he began, and my stomach turned. When Anthony talked about a serious conversation, it was a sign that trouble was coming. "You can speak, my son. I'm listening." "It's about a situation I discovered yesterday," continued Anthony, now looking at me with an accusatory expression that froze my blood. "A very serious situation involving Fela." Dad looked at me confused, then turned his eyes back to Anthony. "What situation? What are you talking about?" "Dad," said Anthony with a theatrically grave voice, "Fela is stealing from you." His words echoed in the room like gunshots. Dad blinked several times, as if he hadn't understood correctly. I was paralyzed, unable to believe what I had just heard. What do you mean?" Dad stuttered, his voice trembling. "I discovered that she's withdrawing money from your account without authorization," lied Anthony, taking some papers from his pocket that I couldn't see clearly. "Look here at the statements. Several withdrawals you didn't make, several suspicious transfers." Dad tried to lean to see the papers, but he was too weak. "Fela, is this true?" I found my voice in the midst of the shock. Dad, this is a lie. Anthony is making this up. A lie? Anthony stood up, feigning indignation. Dad, Fela has access to all your accounts, to all your documents. She makes all the withdrawals. She pays all the bills. How can you be sure what she's been doing with your money? Dad looked at me with a painful confusion in his eyes. Fela, did you take my money without telling me? No, Dad, never. The only money I use from your account is to pay your bills, your medications, your food. All with your authorization, I cried, desperate. Authorization? Anthony laughed cruelly. Dad, when was the last time you saw a statement from your account? When was the last time you checked how much money you have? Dad was silent, and I saw in his eyes that he was beginning to doubt me. This doubt broke my heart in a way I had never felt before. I trust Fela, murmured Dad. But his voice no longer sounded so convinced. Dad, you're sick, you're vulnerable, continued Anthony, with a calculated cruelty. Fela took advantage of that. She brought you to live here precisely to have total control over your finances. That's not true, I exploded, tears beginning to flow. Dad, I brought you here to take better care of you. Out of love for money, said Anthony, cold as ice. Dad, Fela is planning to steal your entire inheritance. She wants the other siblings to receive nothing when you die. Dad closed his eyes, his breathing becoming more difficult. No, it can't be. Yes, it can, Dad. And there's more. Anthony leaned close to the bed, lowering his voice as if he were about to tell a terrible secret. I discovered that she's been giving you the wrong medications. Medications that make you more confused, more dependent. This lie was too much. I stood up from the chair, trembling with anger. Anthony, how dare you? How dare you make up something like that? Make up? He turned to me with his eyes shining with hatred. Then explain why Dad is getting weaker, more confused, since he came to live here? Because he's sick, because he's elderly, because he had a stroke, I shouted. Or because you're poisoning him little by little, said Anthony. And at that moment, I understood that my brother wasn't just greedy. He was malicious. He was capable of any cruelty to get what he wanted. Dad opened his eyes and looked at me with an expression I will never forget. It was fear. Fear of me, his own daughter, who had taken care of him with so much love for years. Fela, would you do this to me? He whispered, his voice broken. No, Dad, never. I love you, I cried, trying to approach the bed. Don't get near him, shouted Anthony, putting himself between me and Dad. Dad, I'm going to take you away from here right now. I'm going to call the police. I'm going to report her. No! Dad tried to get up, but he was too weak. I don't want police. I don't want... Dad, you need protection, insisted Anthony. Fela is using you, is stealing from you, might be trying to kill you. Dad began to cry. Cry like a frightened child, lost, not understanding what was happening. Seeing that strong man, who had raised me with so much love, reduced to that state because of the cruel lies of his own son, was the most painful thing I've ever experienced. Please, stop. I don't understand anything anymore, whimpered Dad. At that moment, the nurse arrived for the afternoon shift and found all that confusion. Anthony began to tell the lies to her too, saying that I was mistreating Dad, stealing from him, poisoning him. The nurse, Mrs. Sarah, who knew our routine for months, looked at me astonished. Miss Fela, what is he talking about? He's making up lies, I said, still crying. He wants to take Dad away from here based on lies. Lies? Anthony showed the papers to Mrs. Sarah. Look here at the statements. Look here at the irregularities. Mrs. Sarah took the papers and examined them. After a few minutes, she shook her head. Sir, these statements are fake. The dates are wrong. The numbers don't add up. This was made up. Anthony turned red with anger. What do you mean, fake? I got these statements from the bank. Impossible, said Mrs. Sarah firmly. I've been working here for 6 months. I know all of Mr. Samuel's accounts. Miss Fela has never made any irregular withdrawal. In fact, she even puts in her own money to supplement his expenses. The truth was being revealed, but the damage was already done. Dad continued to look at me with distrust, still shaken by the accusations he had heard. Dad, I tried to approach again. You've known me for 71 years. When have I ever lied to you? When have I ever done anything malicious? Dad looked at me for a long time, and slowly, very slowly, reason began to return to his eyes. Fela, my girl, forgive me. There's nothing to forgive, Dad. You were confused by lies. Anthony realized that his plan had failed, that his lies had been discovered. But instead of apologizing, instead of acknowledging the error, he went for the final attack. Okay, he said, with a coldness that sent shivers down my spine. The statements might be wrong, but one thing isn't. You're killing Dad slowly, Fela. How dare you? I shouted. Dad has been here for 3 years and has only gotten worse. When he lived alone, he was better. You brought him here to control him, to isolate him from the family, to be the only heir when he dies. Anthony, enough, said Mrs. Sarah, indignant. Miss Fela is one of the best caregivers I've ever seen. Your father is sick because of age, not because of mistreatment. And what do you know about that? He turned to her with contempt. You're her employee. You won't speak badly of your boss. Dad tried to speak, but his voice came out only as a whisper. Anthony, why are you doing this? Because someone needs to protect you, lied Anthony. Because this family is full of opportunists. Opportunists? I exploded. Who is it that only shows up here when he wants something? Who never offered help to take care of him? Who only thinks about inheritance? I work, he shouted. I can't stay here playing nurse like you. Everyone works. But when you love someone, you make time to care. Oh, yeah? And where are the other siblings? John and Peter don't take care of him either. Why do only you have to play nice? Because I offered, because I wanted to, because I love our father. What you love is his inheritance, shouted Anthony, completely losing his composure. It was then that Dad gathered strength and shouted, louder than he had shouted in months. Enough! We all fell silent, startled by his sudden energy. Anthony, said Dad, his voice trembling but firm, you are expelled from my house. I don't want to see you here anymore. Dad, you don't understand. Yes, I do understand. I understand that you came here today to destroy my family, to turn my daughter against me, to make me suffer in my last days of life. Anthony turned pale. Dad, I just wanted to protect you. Protect me from whom? From the daughter who takes care of me every day, who bathes me when I can't, who spends sleepless nights when I'm in pain, who spent her own savings on my medications. Tears were streaming down Dad's face, but now they were tears of indignation, not confusion. You want to protect me from who loves me, Anthony, and that I don't allow. Dad, get out of my house, now. Anthony stood still for a few seconds, then gathered his fake papers and walked toward the door. Before leaving, he turned to me with a look of pure hatred. This isn't over, Fela. One day you'll pay for this. And he left, slamming the door hard. Dad collapsed on the bed, exhausted from the effort of defending me. I sat beside him and held his hand. Forgive me, my daughter, he whispered. Forgive me for doubting you, even if just for a few minutes. There's nothing to forgive, Dad. You were confused by very well-crafted lies. I raised a monster, he muttered, closing his eyes. How does a son turn into this? I didn't know what to answer. I also wondered how Anthony had reached that point of cruelty, how he had been capable of trying to destroy the last days of his own father's life, just out of greed. That episode left Dad very shaken. In the following days, he became quieter, sadder, as if something inside him had broken permanently. Anthony's betrayal had wounded deeper than any disease. And it was this wound, this deep sadness caused by the cruelty of his own son, that accelerated the end. As if Dad had lost the will to fight, to continue living in a world where a son could be so cruel to the father who raised him with love. 2 weeks after that terrible episode, Dad began to wither. He stopped eating properly, slept all the time, sometimes called for Mom during sleep. The doctor said there was nothing clinically wrong. He was simply saying goodbye to life. On July 15th, 2019, on a Monday morning, Dad didn't wake up. He died in his sleep, in peace, after a lifetime of work and sacrifice for his children. He died knowing he was loved, but carrying in his heart the pain of having been betrayed by one of the sons he loved most. And it was at this funeral, at this moment of absolute pain, that Anthony decided to give me the final blow. The blow that would forever destroy any possibility of reconciliation between us. The funeral was scheduled to begin at 2 p.m. at St. Joseph's Funeral Home in the center of Triumph. I spent the entire morning organizing the final details, choosing the flowers Dad liked, providing the photos to place next to the coffin, calling distant relatives who needed to know the news. I was exhausted, but it was an exhaustion mixed with a strange peace. Dad had departed without suffering, after a full life, surrounded by love. It was the kind of death any child would wish for their father, dignified, peaceful, in the place where he felt loved. I arrived at the funeral home at 1:30 in the afternoon. The coffin was open, and Dad seemed to be sleeping. They had arranged him in the navy blue suit he wore on Sundays to go to church, combed his white hair with care, placed the rosary that Mom had given him 40 years ago between his hands. The first to arrive were my children and grandchildren. They cried, said goodbye to their grandfather, told beautiful stories about him. Soon after came John and Peter with their families. They were sad but accepting. They knew Dad had lived well and departed at the right time. By 3 o'clock, the funeral home was full. Neighbors, friends from church, people who had known Dad for decades came to pay their condolences. Everyone had a kind word about him, a good memory to share, a story that showed the kind of man he had been. Mrs. Carmen, our neighbor of 50 years, cried as if she had lost a brother. Mr. Samuel was a man of gold, she said, holding my hands. I never saw him speak ill of anyone, never saw him deny help to whoever needed it. Father Michael, who had known Dad since he arrived at the parish 20 years ago, said a beautiful prayer, talking about how Dad was an example of faith, of dedication to family, of honesty. Samuel lived as a true Christian, he said. He leaves a legacy of love and decency. At 4 o'clock, when the funeral was at its peak, when the funeral home was packed with people paying their last respects, Anthony arrived. I saw him entering through the main door, and my heart jumped. I didn't know if he would come, after what had happened 2 weeks before. I didn't know if he would have the courage to show up after the cruel lies he had told, after causing so much suffering to Dad in his last days of life. But he came, and he didn't come alone. He brought his wife, 2 children, and 3 more people I didn't know, all dressed in black, all with serious faces. But there was something in their behavior that left me uneasy. Anthony didn't come to greet me first, as would be natural. He didn't come to give me condolences, didn't come to hug me as siblings do in moments of pain. Instead, he went straight to the coffin, looked at Dad for a few seconds, then began to circulate around the funeral home as if he were inspecting something. The people he brought spread around the room, talking quietly among themselves, making notes in a small notebook, observing everything with investigative eyes. It was as if they were detectives at a crime scene, not family members at a funeral. John approached me, concerned. "Fela, who are those people who came with Anthony?" "I don't know. Never seen them before. They're asking strange questions to people. They asked Mrs. Carmen if Dad had been sick for a long time, if he was lucid until the end." A chill ran down my spine. "What kind of questions?" "They also asked if you took good care of him, if he was being well treated." Mrs. Carmen was offended, said you were an exemplary daughter. I began to understand what was happening. Anthony had brought witnesses, people to investigate, to try to find some evidence that I had mistreated Dad. Even at the funeral, even on the day when he should be mourning the loss of his father, he was plotting against me. At 5 o'clock, when more people had arrived and the room was even fuller, Anthony approached me for the first time. He didn't come alone. He brought one of the men he had brought, a thin man, with glasses, with the face of a lawyer. "Fela," he said, pretending a politeness he didn't feel. "I want to introduce you to Mr. Martin, my lawyer." My heart froze. Lawyer? At Dad's funeral? "Anthony, what does this mean?" "It means I'm going to contest the will," he said, without beating around the bush, without even bothering to lower his voice. "I have reason to believe that Dad wasn't in mental condition to make a will when he did." The people around stopped talking. An embarrassed silence spread through the room. It wasn't possible that he was doing that there, in front of Dad's coffin, in front of the entire community. "Anthony, this is neither the time nor the place to talk about this," I whispered, trying to avoid a scandal. Oh, it's not? He raised his voice deliberately. And when would be the time? After you've already taken possession of everything. Peter approached, trying to calm the situation. Anthony, for God's sake, we're at Dad's funeral. We are indeed. And that's why it's the perfect time to speak the truth, said Anthony, now speaking loud enough for everyone to hear. For everyone to know how our sister manipulated our father in recent years. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. On the day of Dad's burial, in front of all friends and neighbors, he was publicly accusing me of having manipulated our father. Anthony, you're exaggerating, John tried. Exaggerating? Anthony laughed, but it was a bitter laugh, full of anger. Do you know that Dad left 70% of the inheritance to her? 70%. For the four of us, only 30% remained to divide. People began to whisper among themselves. Some looked at me with curiosity, others with distrust. It was exactly what Anthony wanted, to create a public situation where I would seem guilty of something. That's not true, I shouted, losing my patience. The will divides everything equally among the 5 children. You want me to believe that? He turned to me with his eyes shining with hatred. After 3 years living with him, controlling his every move, every decision, I took care of him. I took care because you didn't want to. Took care or controlled. He took a step forward, approaching me threateningly. How many times did you isolate him from us? How many times did you say he was too tired to receive visits? How many times did you make up that he was sleeping when we called? Each of his questions was like a stab. He was distorting all my care, transforming every protection I had given Dad into evidence of manipulation. He was sick. He needed rest. You didn't understand his condition. We didn't understand because you wouldn't let us understand, exploded Anthony. You kept him away from all of us to have total control over him. Father Michael tried to intervene. My children, this is not the moment. Yes, it is the moment, cut off Anthony, turning to the priest and to the entire crowd that was now watching us in silence. It's the moment for everyone to know what kind of daughter our sister really is. And then he said the words that haunt me to this day, the words that destroyed my reputation in the community, that stained my image forever. You killed our father, you damn snake! He died of heartbreak because of you! The silence that followed was deafening. All conversations stopped. All murmurs ceased. It was as if the entire world had stopped to process the terrible accusation that my own brother had just made. Anthony! Shouted Peter, horrified. It's true, continued Anthony, now completely out of control. She isolated him, manipulated him, left him sad and confused in the last months. Dad died of heartbreak because he discovered what kind of daughter he had raised. Tears streamed down my face, but they weren't just tears of sadness. They were tears of humiliation, of indignation, of deep pain for being accused of those horrible things at the funeral of my own father. How dare you? I managed to whisper. How dare you say this at his funeral? I dare because it's true, he shouted, pointing his finger at me. You killed him little by little, with your manipulations, with your control, with your selfishness. John tried to put himself between us. Anthony, stop this! You're disrespecting Dad. Who disrespected Dad was her. He looked at me with a hatred I will never forget. She who treated him like a prisoner. She who left him without the will to live. Mrs. Carmen, who had known our family for 50 years, couldn't take it. Anthony Anderson, how can you have the courage? Your sister was an angel in your father's life. She took care of him like no one else. You don't know anything. He turned to her with disrespect. You only saw what she wanted to show. I saw what happened every day, replied Mrs. Carmen, indignant. I saw her taking your father to the doctor, buying medicine with her own money, spending sleepless nights when he was sick. All theater, insisted Anthony. All to appear the perfect daughter while isolating him from us. Mr. Martin, the lawyer, tried to pull Anthony. Anthony, let's go. It's not the time. Yes, it is the time. He shook off the lawyer. It's time for everyone to know the truth about her. Peter was crying now, not just for the death of his father, but for the horrible situation Anthony was creating. Anthony, for God's sake, stop this. Dad is listening. Dad is listening and seeing the daughter he thought was a saint being exposed, shouted Anthony, losing any trace of sanity. It was then that I completely lost control. 3 years of dedicated care, 3 years of sacrifices, 3 years of unconditional love being thrown in the mud by my own brother on the day of my father's burial. It was too much for any human being to bear. "You're a monster!" I shouted at him, my voice echoing throughout the room. "A monster who only showed up here when he wanted something. Where were you when Dad had pneumonia? Where were you when he fell in the bathroom? Where were you in the middle of the nights when he cried in pain?" Anthony turned red with anger. "I was working, supporting my family, and I was here, taking care of our father, because someone had to do it. You did it because you wanted to inherit everything. I did it because I loved him." The discussion had turned into a total shouting match. People looked horrified. Some began to leave the funeral home, others moved away from the coffin. The priest tried to calm the situation, but even he couldn't control the fury that had taken over both of us. That's when Anthony said the most terrible thing anyone could say. "You killed him, killed our father with your manipulation. He was better before you got your claws into him." And then, in an explosion of anger that I didn't know existed within me, I shouted back, "If I killed him, why didn't you stop it? Why did you never come here to take care of him? Why did you only show up when you wanted to talk about inheritance?" Anthony was silent for a few seconds, then said the phrase that forever sealed the end of our relationship. "Because I knew you would do this, knew you would use him until you killed him, and now everyone knows too." At that moment, Peter and John managed to hold Anthony by the arms. "Enough, both of you, enough!" shouted Peter. Father Michael approached me, trying to calm me down. "Mrs. Fela, take a deep breath. Your father doesn't deserve this." He was right. Dad didn't deserve to have his children fighting like that at his funeral. He didn't deserve to have his farewell turned into a battlefield by 2 out-of-control children. But the damage was done. The entire community had heard Anthony's terrible accusations. The whole town would comment that the son had accused the daughter of killing the father. My reputation, built over 71 years, had been destroyed in 15 minutes of fury. Anthony was removed from the funeral home by his brothers and the lawyer. Before leaving, he turned to me one last time and said, "This won't end here, Fela. I'll prove that you manipulated Dad. I'll prove that you don't deserve to inherit anything from him." And he left, leaving behind a destroyed funeral, a shattered family, and a daughter humiliated on the most painful day of her life. The people who remained tried to console me, tried to say they knew I was innocent, that Anthony was distraught with grief. But I saw in the eyes of some the doubt, the curiosity, the speculation about whether there was any truth in his accusations. The burial the next day was a much smaller, much quieter event. Many people who would have been present decided not to go, embarrassed by the confusion at the wake. Others went, but kept their distance, observing me with morbid curiosity. Anthony didn't show up at the burial. He didn't say goodbye to his father, didn't throw dirt on the coffin, didn't say a final prayer. He simply disappeared, making it clear that our war was just beginning. A week after the burial, I received a call from Mr. Henry scheduling the reading of the will. It was a rainy Wednesday in July, and I was still trying to process everything that had happened at the funeral. Anthony's cruel words echoed in my head day and night, and I could barely leave the house without feeling the curious looks of the neighbors. The reading was scheduled for the following Friday at Mr. Henry's office. All the children were summoned: me, Anthony, John, and Peter. It was the moment I feared most, because I knew Anthony would use that occasion to continue his accusations, to try to prove that I had manipulated Dad. I arrived at the office 15 minutes before the scheduled time. John and Peter were already there, sitting in one of the armchairs in the waiting room with worried faces. We hugged in silence. We were all still shaken by the confusion at the funeral. "How are you, Fela?" asked John, holding my hand. "Surviving," I replied, because it was the truth. Each day since Dad's death had been a struggle to get out of bed, to manage to eat something, to manage to move forward. Peter was quieter than normal. "Fela, you know we don't believe anything that Anthony said, right?" "I know, but half the town believes it." It was true. In recent days, I had felt the change in the way people looked at me on the street, at the bakery, at the market. Some still greeted me normally, but others averted their gaze, whispered when I passed by, treated me with a coldness that hurt my soul. At 2 o'clock sharp, Anthony arrived. He didn't come alone. He brought his lawyer, Mr. Martin, and another man I didn't know. He entered the office without greeting me, without speaking to John or Peter, as if we were strangers. Mr. Henry called us into the meeting room. It was a formal environment, with a large wooden table, leather chairs, shelves full of law books. We all sat around the table, with Anthony and his lawyers on one side, me and my brothers on the other. "Before beginning the reading," said Mr. Henry, "I need to clarify some issues that have been raised. I received a formal request from Mr. Martin questioning the validity of this will." My heart raced. "What do you mean questioning?" "Mr." Martin stood up, taking a folder of documents from his briefcase. "Mr. Henry, we have reason to believe that Mr. Samuel was not in full mental capacity when he made this will. We want to request an investigation into possible coercion or manipulation." "This is ridiculous," I exploded. "Dad was perfectly lucid when he made the will." "Was he?" Anthony stared at me with those cold eyes. An 85-year-old man, sick, dependent, living in the house of the daughter who controlled every aspect of his life. Mr. Henry raised his hand, asking for silence. "Let's take it easy. Mr. Samuel's will was made in March 2018, when he was still in full mental capacity. I have here the medical report that proves his mental capacity at the time." "March 2018? Anthony was visibly surprised. "But he was already living in her house at that time." "He was living with me out of medical necessity," I replied, "not because of manipulation." Mr. Henry opened the will and began to read. "I, Samuel Anderson, in full possession of my mental faculties, declare as my last wish." As the reading progressed, I saw Anthony's expression changing. The will divided all of Dad's assets equally among the 5 children. Each would receive 20% of the inheritance, the house, the savings, everything divided equally. There was no favoritism for me. There wasn't the 70% that Anthony had invented at the funeral. It was a fair, equal division, as Dad always did everything in life. When Mr. Henry finished the reading, a heavy silence took over the room. Anthony was visibly upset, nervously moving the papers in front of him. "Is this division correct?" he asked, his voice tense. 20% for each child?" "It is. And there's a special clause here," continued Mr. Henry. "Mr. Samuel left specific instructions about the care he received in recent years." My heart accelerated. What had Dad written about this? He writes verbatim, "I want to record my infinite gratitude to my daughter Ophelia, who gave up her own life to care for me with love and dedication in my last years. She never asked me for anything in return, never pressured me about inheritance, never made me feel like a burden. On the contrary, she made me feel loved and valued until the last day. If it were possible, I would leave everything to her, but I know that would cause conflicts in the family. Therefore, I divide everything equally. But I leave it recorded that Ophelia deserved much more." Tears streamed down my face. Dad had predicted this situation, had recorded his gratitude, had protected my reputation even after death. But Anthony wasn't satisfied. "This doesn't prove anything. He was under her influence when he wrote this." "Anthony," said Mr. Henry patiently, "your father made this will in my office, without the presence of any of the children. I talked with him for 2 hours. He was lucid, oriented, knew exactly what he was doing." "But he was already living in her house. He was already being manipulated." "He was being cared for," corrected Peter. "There's a difference." Mr. Martin tried one last card. "We would like to request an audit of Ophelia's expenses with her father. We want to verify if there was any misappropriation." "You can audit all you want," I replied firmly. "I have all the invoices, all the receipts, all the proof. I spent more of my own money on Dad than he spent on me, and it was true. In the last 3 years, I had used my own savings to supplement the costs of caring for Dad. Expensive medications that insurance didn't cover, private consultations, medical equipment, house renovation to adapt it to his needs." Mr. Henry pulled out another folder. "Actually, I have here a survey that Mr. Samuel himself asked me to make. He wanted to document all the extra expenses that Ophelia had with him." He opened the folder and began to read numbers. "It was more than $30,000 in 3 years. My money, from my savings, that I had spent with love, without expecting anything in return. According to this document, continued Mr. Henry, Ophelia would be entitled to receive these amounts from the inheritance before the division. But your father left instructions for this not to be charged as a way of recognizing her love. Anthony turned pale. His entire discourse about manipulation and financial interest was being dismantled by Dad's own documents. This can't be right, he stammered. It's all documented with invoices attached, said Mr. Henry. Your father was a meticulous man. He wanted to make sure the truth would be known. John shook his head, emotional. Dad knew this would happen. He knew Anthony would question everything. He told me in one of our last conversations that he was worried about possible conflicts after his death, confirmed Mr. Henry. That's why he made a point of documenting everything, of leaving everything very clear. Anthony stood up from his chair, nervous. You may have documents, but that doesn't change the fact that she isolated our father from us. Anthony, said John, tired, you isolated yourself. How many times did Fela call you inviting you to have lunch with us? How many times did she ask you to participate in his care? I worked. Everyone works, said Peter. But when you love someone, you make time. You're all against me, said Anthony, paranoia taking over him. You've all been bought by her. Nobody has been bought by anybody, said Mr. Henry, losing his patience. The facts are simple. Your father made a fair will. Your sister took care of him with dedication, and now you will receive the inheritance that is rightfully yours. I don't accept this, said Anthony, gathering his papers. I'll appeal. I'll take this to court. I'll prove there was manipulation. You can appeal all you want, said Mr. Henry, but I can guarantee you're wasting time and money. This will is solid, legal, and unquestionable. Anthony left the room without saying goodbye to anyone, followed by his lawyers. Before crossing the door, he turned to me one last time. This isn't over, Fela. I'll never speak to you again, but this isn't over. And it was the last time I saw my brother in person. In the months that followed, he really did file an appeal in court. He spent a fortune on lawyers trying to prove that Dad wasn't mentally competent when he made the will. But all the medical reports, all the witnesses, all the documents proved otherwise. A year later, the appeal was denied. The will was definitively validated. The inheritance was released for division among the 5 children, exactly as Dad had determined. But for me, it wasn't a victory. It was money stained with blood, inheritance poisoned by cruel accusations, by unnecessary conflicts, by the destruction of our family. John and Peter tried to make peace with Anthony after everything was resolved in court. They called him, went to his house, tried to talk. But he wouldn't hear of it. He said they had sold out to me, that he couldn't trust anyone in the family. Today, 5 years after Dad's death, I have no contact with Anthony anymore. I heard from the other brothers that he moved to another state, that he rarely calls, that he has practically cut ties with the entire family. And you know what's saddest? All this for what? For an inheritance that wasn't even that much. The house was sold and divided among us 5. Each received $24,000. Dad's savings were $8,000, which divided gave $1,600 for each one. It was for this ridiculous amount that Anthony destroyed our family. It was for these few $1,000s that he accused me of being a murderer at our own father's funeral. It was for this money that he renounced having siblings, nieces, and nephews, a family that loved him. Sometimes I wonder if he regrets it, if in the lonely early hours he remembers the times when we were children, playing together in the backyard, if he misses the family gatherings, the Sunday lunches, the hugs from the nieces and nephews. He barely knows, but I know his pride is greater than any regret. He preferred to stay alone, bitter, feeding his anger, rather than admit he was wrong. And me? I move forward. I have my other brothers, my children, my grandchildren. I have a clear conscience that I did everything out of love, that I took care of Dad the best way I could, that he died knowing he was loved. But I will forever carry the pain of having lost not only my father, but also my brother, of having seen a family that Mom built with so much love shattered by greed and resentment. My dear friends who have followed me to this point, this painful story has come to an end. If it touched you in any way, please leave a like on this video and subscribe to Grandparents' Tales. Your likes and subscriptions give me strength to continue sharing these memories, even when it's difficult to relive certain pains. Because life teaches us this. There will always be people who will disappoint us. There will always be those who will hurt us, even within our own family. But there are also those who truly love us, who stay by our side in difficult moments, who give us strength to move forward. On that day, I buried my father and the last part of my family.